Okay, so in this video, I'm going to kind of run you guys through character creation for the full version of Baldur's Gate 3. This is not early access. This is what the character creator looks like in the full version of the game. And I'm going to kind of run you guys through what your decisions and things are going to affect and things you need to know about character creation. Some of you guys will probably be familiar with this already from playing early access or from just absorbing all information on the internet. But for those of you that have not played Baldur's Gate 3 before or just want some extra information, then this guide is for you. So the very first thing you're going to choose during character creation is your origin. Whether you want to play a unique character that has no backstory, that you can kind of roleplay their backstory, or if you want to select a character that has an origin that has its own story with inside of Baldur's Gate 3. For instance, if you choose something like Astarion, you're going to be wrestling with Astarion and what's going on with him and the fact that he is a vampire and how he's dealing with this, how he became one, and, you know, what sort of impact that has on your gameplay as you're interacting with characters in the world. So you need to decide whether you're going to select one of these origin characters or whether you're going to play a custom character. Now, if you decide to choose one of these origin characters, your race and class will be fixed for you and you won't be choosing those. So keep that in mind. Unless you choose the Dark Urge has an origin story, but you can actually customize his race and class or her race and class. So that's really up to you if you pick that one. But otherwise, you're going to make a custom character, pick from one of the origin characters, and then move forward. So assuming you chose a custom character or the Dark Urge, you'll then select your race. And race is going to impact several things in Baldur's Gate 3. Race is going to give you certain dialogue options that are only available to your race in specific dialogues. So you'll be able to, for instance, if you choose Githyanki or something like that, you'll have Githyanki unique dialogues in a lot of scenarios. And that can impact the way certain events unfold in the game. Additionally, even in dialogues where you don't have unique dialogue options, you may be treated differently because you are a certain race. The characters you're interacting with may have preconceived notions about you because of your race. So there is impact on the dialogue front depending on what race you choose, and I think this is probably one of the more important things to think about when choosing your race. Besides this, though, you're going to also gain racial features. Some races have all their racial features initially, some gain them as they level up. But these are important, and you want to mouse over these and see what they are. We don't have a lot of that in the footage here, but you can mouse over the racial features during character creation, and you can see what races do. For instance, some of them have dark vision, which makes it so it's easier for you to see in the dark, which helps a lot in combat in specific areas of the game where it's hard to see. Some of them have like higher critical damage, like half-orc. Some of them have proficiencies like half-elf and human. So these things are important to take note of. Additionally, if you're coming from D&D 5th edition tabletop, you'll notice that races no longer have ability scores associated with them. So instead of ability scores being added to races, these have instead been added to the class you select. And I'll get into that more in the class section. But you do not need to worry about ability scores when selecting your race any longer. And I'm reasonably certain that the logic behind this was to allow players to the freedom to play whatever race they want with whatever class they want and not feel like they weren't min-maxing as well as they could be. I think there were a lot of classes that worked well with very specific races in 5e, and I think this is an attempt to sort of limit that and allow players more freedom. So once you've chosen your race, then you will choose a sub-race inside that race, and these also have specific racial features most of the time. So you'll want to look at what these are and see if they benefit you in some way and read their descriptions and see if that matches a character that you want to roleplay. Keep in mind that your subrace will have an impact in some of the dialogues that you have as well, but not as often as your general race. And one thing I want to note here too that's completely optional to you is that some items in the game work better with certain races, meaning they will like have more damage or have a bonus effect if they're used by a character of a certain race. If you want to see what those are, you can look on the wiki to plan ahead if you want to use those items for your build, if you have a specific build in mind. I don't recommend that if you don't want to get spoiled or anything like that, but just so you know that that's possible in the game and that something you might have wished you'd known later, just to give you that information now. So then once you selected your race, you're going to go and select your class, and there are 12 classes in Baldur's Gate 3. There are Barbarian, Bard, Cleric, Druid, Fighter, Monk, Paladin, Ranger, Rogue, Sorcerer, Warlock, and Wizard. And each one of these classes has a basic theme to it. You can mouse over them to read what the descriptions of these are. For instance, barbarians are like unarmored fighters that are very strong and can deal a lot of melee damage. And you're going to look over some of these and you'll see things like about them, like what their class features are. You can mouse over their class features to see what they get at level 1. Keep in mind, these are the default class features you're going to begin the game with, and these will be added to as you progress with your character. These are not the only things that you have. You will also see spells and cantrips if you mouse over spellcasting classes, and cantrips are effectively like level 0 spells. You can cast them every turn if you want. They have unlimited casts. And what's really important to note about that is that spells in Baldur's Gate 3 are like single use each spell, and you have a certain amount of spell slots, and when you run out you need to go rest. Either for some classes it's a short rest, but for most spellcasting classes you'll need to go rest at camp to replenish these. Cantrips, that's not the case. You can keep using these every turn. So when you see a cantrip, just know that it's a spell that you can cast basically as much as you want. And depending on what class you selected, you'll be prompted to select a subclass in some cases. Keep in mind that not all classes have their subclasses available to them during character creation, and that a lot of these classes either gain their subclass at level 3 or level 2, so you won't know what those subclasses are during character creation, and I would urge you to check on the wiki or on our YouTube channel to see what those are ahead of time. We're going to have a video on classes and all the subclasses, so you can see that, kind of make a decision ahead of time, even though you won't be able to see that during character creation. But for instance, should you choose the Sorcerer class, you'll be able to select from Wild Magic, Draconic Bloodline, and Storm Sorcery, and this will give you a description on like what those specific subclasses do, and it'll also show you the subclass features you gain immediately. It won't, again, show you all the ones you'll gain as you level up, but it'll show you the ones you gain instantly when choosing these subclasses. And then if you're choosing a spellcaster, you'll also have to select the cantrips and spells that you want to use at the beginning of the game. And unless you are very, very familiar with 5e, I highly recommend just going with the default spells that they have. In a lot of cases, you can change these later on as you level up. If you realize, oh, I don't really like this spell, I want to change it for something else. And a lot of classes also allow you to change the spells that you have known, like Cleric, for instance. So it's not super important on your first character, and I would urge you, again, if you're not familiar with 5e, to just stick with the recommended spells. So then once you've selected that, you're going to select your background, and your background will also have implications in terms of dialogue. Sometimes you'll have dialogue options that are related to your background, and you should read through these to see what they are in case you have like a real good sense of role playing and there's a specific type of character with a backstory that you really want. But these are also going to give you proficiencies with certain skills, and what skills those are is going to be determined by the background that you select. This isn't a mechanics video, so I don't want to get too deeply into what proficiencies are, but just know that if you're proficient in a certain skill, you're going to be better with it. Your rolls are going to be better with that skill. So look for, proficiencies and skills with your background if you're trying to put together a specific type of character that benefit the type of character that you want. For instance, if you're playing a very charismatic character and you plan on, doing the schmoozing and dialogue very often, having proficiency in persuasion, intimidation, and deception are all really good for that type of character. So look for those things. Whereas if you want to be a thief, then you might want to look for other proficiencies like sleight of hand. And the last thing that you're going to do is assign your ability score points into Strength, Dexterity, Constitution, Intelligence, Wisdom, and Charisma. And usually there'll be like a setup already there, kind of like, I don't know, a soft recommended attribute distribution or ability score distribution. And it's not terrible to follow that, but I do find that sometimes it's better to customize it a little bit. And ability scores are very, very important to your character, and the way you set up here in character creation is crucial to the success of your character. Keep in mind that you can respec pretty much from very, very early on in the game, including your ability score. So you don't have to sit here and like lament over it for a very long period of time to make sure you don't mess it up. I would just, suggest that you either go with what's recommended or give you one helpful tip, which is that try to stick to even numbers when possible. This is probably not true for 100% of characters, but for the majority of characters, you want to try and stick to even values if possible. And this is because you gain modifiers at every even value. If you're at 8, you gain -1. If you're at 10, you gain 0 to your rolls. If you're at 12, you gain +1. If you're at 14, +2. If you're at 16, you'll gain +3. You can't get higher than 17 during character creation. So the most you're going to gain is +3, because even if you have 17, since it's not an even number, you won't gain +4. But there are various roles affected by your ability scores. For instance, we'll just take Strength as an example. Strength will affect athletics checks, so anytime you need to make an athletics test in a dialogue option or a scenario out on the landscape, it will roll an extra +1 for every even number above 10. So if you're at 12, you'll get an extra +1 to that roll. If you're at 14, +2, 16, +3, 18, +4, etc. So that's good for that, but also strength influences the chance to hit and melee combat. So it'll make it more likely you'll connect with your melee attacks, and it'll also increase the damage that you do for each +1. So it's important to know and look over what these ability scores do, because every class typically has a focus on a different ability score, or in some cases, they might have 2 abilities that they are very focused on. But generally speaking, you want to try and aim for even numbers. It's a very good tip for new players. And we'll get into like specific values for specific classes in later videos to give you a much better understanding of how this all works. And then obviously, once you've kind of figured out what sort of character you want, then you're going to customize the appearance of that character, the gender of that character, the color hair, eyes. Apparently you can pick whatever genitals you want on that character too. I didn't know that, so Cyberpunk, here we come. There are a lot of different character customization options. You can choose your voice, and even though your character doesn't normally talk during dialogue cutscenes, they will say things when they're moving around on the landscape, so you will hear their voice periodically. You might wonder, whose voice is that? That's typically your character talking, so they do have voiced lines. They're just typically not in cutscenes. But that sort of wraps up our character creation video and the way character creation is handled with the full version of the game. A lot of this is probably known to some of you guys. For those of you that are new, this is new to you guys. I hope I gave you some helpful tips and some things you might not know. But we will go into a lot more specifics in the races video, talking about specific racial features, why you might choose a race or not. And we will also get into another separate video on classes and subclasses, and why you might take those classes and subclasses and what you get when you do as well. So stay tuned for those. Those should be coming out later this week.